Got a quick one here, folks. Back on the breakthrough cases vaccine trail. Touched on this last week when we started talking about how your mainstream news outlets have started adopting the phrase breakthrough cases. And for the most part, they're making it sound like it's very rare when this happens. And what is a breakthrough case? Well, according to the CDC, that means that you've been fully vaccinated and you've got COVID anyway. Fully vaccinated means that you've gotten your 2-shot, 3-shot, however many shot they're going to give you. And after about 2 weeks or so, more than 2 weeks, you still got COVID anyway. And according to the CDC, there are approximately 9,245 people as of April 26th who got COVID after getting fully vaccinated. This is not the number of people who had an adverse side effect to the vaccine. That's an entirely different study and tracking system, which we'll be getting to later. This is strictly the people who got the shot, were fully vaccinated, thought themselves safe, and now possibly immune from COVID, and caught it anyway. And for 132 of them died. And this is the CDC giving you this number, so given their talent for making the numbers look a certain way and be a certain way, it probably means it's a hell of a lot more than whatever you're looking at here, but let's assume we take them at their word for it and say 9,245 people got COVID anyway, and over 100 of them died. When you go through Google and you start looking at some of these stories about breakthrough cases, the news headlines have to give you a lot of context. It's all about how rare it is. Few. They're using words like few, and then we keep digging in, you say cases are extremely rare. Like, this is the sort of results that you get when you first land on trying to figure out what this new turn of phrase is. And it's not that new, but for the sake of COVID-19, it is. 95%, 98% effective this thing is, and yet there are, few and far cases in like just about every state. So the further in you go down this rabbit hole, you're going to see like local outlets. Here's New Jersey, before it was Missouri. Like, they've all got few cases. You add all those few cases together, probably get to that 9,000, if not a hell of a lot more. But and that's, not even considering the people who got like their first dose and then got COVID after their first dose, because they're not counting those at all. They're not saying that those people were vaccinated at all. Those just go into the unvaccinated people. So it's a very specific set of rules that they've established for fully vaccinated people, and by those very specific set of rules, they're still running into thousands of people who caught it. Now, let's assume you dive into one of these stories, right? You are going to see some of the faultiest math you have ever seen. Data shows rate of COVID-19 breakthrough cases among fully vaccinated Wisconsin residents is 0.03%. Now you look at something like that and you say, wow, that sounds great, 0.03%, that's hardly anyone. I like my chances with that. They won't let this number stick when it's like, COVID deaths, when you compare it to the overall population, and it's really more or less around 0.0 something or less than 1%. If we're being generous. Like, they don't give you that kind of headline when it comes to COVID deaths, but when it comes to things that they favor, like this vaccine and the breakthrough cases associated with it, they will happily trump out the less than 1% number. That is until, of course, you get around to reading the article to figure out how they got to this 0.03%, and let me assure you, it is nonsense, so get your bullshit goggles on, because you need to see this to believe it. This shows the vaccines are actually even more protective than the original estimates. Oh, this is so great. Then you get to, how did they come to this number? Well, let's see here. Wisconsin has seen a number of COVID-19 breakthrough cases among residents who have already been vaccinated in the past few weeks, right? They go on to say that, they consider that you've been 14 days after being fully vaccinated, just kind of what we were saying. So, here we get to the math, right? According to the Wisconsin State Journal, new data has been released showing 0.03% of fully vaccinated Wisconsin residents have contracted COVID-19. How did you get to that number? Well, in other words, there have been 605 reported COVID-19 cases in Wisconsin among 1.8 million residents. All right, so if you take this 605 and then you divide it within this 1.8 million, 0.03% actually makes a hell of a lot of sense. And if you were just a casual reader and you would look at that and you say, oh, okay, well, that proves that I'm going to go and get my second shot and stop by Krispy Kreme for my free donut. This number is so blatantly false for the very simple reason that any basic analysis would come up with, which is to say that they are trying to imply that all 1.8 million residents were exposed to COVID. That's the implication they're trying to give you with this 0.03% number. 605 out of 1.8 million. 605, not out of possibly, let's assume out of this number, 100,000 of them were exposed to COVID. Let's be generous and say 100,000, but it may be more like 10,000, who knows? And then that's for the people who actually tested positive, right? You have your asymptomatic folks who didn't even bother to show up to get tested. If you don't feel sick, why bother to get tested? You got your vaccine. So, you obviously don't have COVID if you don't feel sick. This is the kind of thing that kind of works in their favor, even though it's one of the things that we pointed to throughout last year to say, hey, COVID's not that bad when you look at the overall number, when you consider all the people who didn't get tested. But that aside, they are trying to imply that all 1.8 million residents were exposed to COVID in the last couple of weeks. And because of that, 605 of them got COVID, and so the vaccine is 0.03% effective. Bullshit math. And you would think that it's just one of these papers, but it's most of them that you would look through here that have a specific city and try to give you anything resembling numbers. The rest of them, they try to keep it pretty vague, so you never actually boil into how they got into their less than 1%. But for folks like these who give you some hard data to look at and you realize that the data is mostly bullshit, it just keeps getting worse. So here's another one, right? COVID-19, brand new data on number of breakthrough cases among fully vaccinated people, and it's been released by the CDC. This is, I don't know who the White Plains Daily Voice is, but they're just as good at being propagandists as you'd expect. They will say, to be fully vaccinated, you gotta have 2 weeks or more after blah, 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 and of those nearly 100 million fully vaccinated people, only 9,245 people have had some sort of breakthrough case, which kind of aligns to the CDC, 9,245 out of 100 million. These people are trying to imply that 100 million people were exposed to COVID and only 9,000 of them got it. Dishonesty on a scale that you don't even have to think that much. They don't put the effort in to lie to you that would be required to get away with the sort of shit they're saying. And we've been, harping on about this for almost a year now. Yet these people don't even bother to lie to you properly anymore, which is why they can give you a stat like that, which the most basic, and I mean just the most basic amount of reasoning, will help you come to the conclusion that that's a false statistic. It is simply false. There is no other word for it. You cannot tell people that they have an infection rate of 0.03% out of 1.8 million if the 1.8 million didn't get affected by it. And this is the same kind of crap we were seeing during the vaccine trials, where they said, we injected 20,000 people with the thing, and the other 20,000 got the placebo, and of the 20,000 who got the vaccine, we counted about 100 cases or something like that, And then you think to yourself, what about the others? How did they get exposed to it? Did you make sure that they all got exposed to COVID to see how effective that is? No. There are studies being performed right now on people who have gotten COVID in the past, who are going to be reinfected with COVID to see how long their antibodies last. Not related to the vaccine. That's a whole other thing. I'll probably have to dig into those stories. But there are studies where they do infect a person with COVID to see how badly they react to it. That is a thing. Except when you're talking about a vaccine. When they're doing the vaccine, they do not expose you to COVID. They tell you to go home, probably self-isolate, and if you haven't gotten COVID in a month or 2 weeks or whatever, that means that it was a success. And it's the same kind of nonsense they're trying to run with right now. And it's painfully obvious. It is absolutely painfully obvious. And it gets worse because you've got some of the few real journalists left around. A guy like Alex Berenson, he used to work for the New York Times. He's got a cracking tweet here where he talked about how the PCR threshold, You know those trusty PCRs and how high those cycle thresholds were, to the point where people who felt perfectly fine were diagnosed with having COVID and had to go and self-isolate and all this crap last year, and they said the cycles were too high, and around the same time Dirty Joe hit the White House, they reduced their cycle count, and voila, the case count went down dramatically and has continued to go down dramatically ever since. It was not a courtesy they were willing to offer Donald Trump, but it is one they gave to Joe Biden. And to further pad their propaganda with their vaccine, they are now going to be using a lower threshold for people who've been vaccinated compared to everybody else. And that lower threshold is less than 28 cycles. So, for context, here we are. This is the document that he's referring to. It's straight out of the CDC website. You can find this yourself. It's got their lovely logo on there if you choose to read it. And they say that, and I don't know if this is even positioned that well on the screen. Separate it here so we can take a better look at it. Okay, so they have said that clinical specimens for sequencing should have a PCR threshold of 28 cycles or less. 28 cycles or less. Okay? That is according to the guidance offered whenever people are testing for a breakthrough case investigation. Okay, they're going to cook the books, and thankfully they always publish all the books they're cooking. How big of a difference is 28 cycles compared to the normal cycle? Well, what is the normal cycle? Let's get it straight out of the WHO. The normal cycle, according to the WHO, is 37 is considered positive. So less than 37 cycles, 37 or less, if you test positive within that threshold, you are considered a positive case. If it's above 40, you are considered negative. And I think this is the new standard that was rolled out with Dirty Joe, but don't quote me on that. So 37. 37 for everybody else, and 28 if you've been vaccinated. They're telling you this to your face. All right? If you take the time, you can go and you can read this. I highly recommend following somebody like Alex Berenson on Twitter, because he's just full of this stuff. Like, we could dedicate a whole show just to his tweets and make a living just talking about some of the stuff he's discovering on his tweets. But it's scary. It is very scary to think that they will actually now manipulate their case data, something that we've seen them inflate and deflate whenever it suits them. And now they're going to use that funky math and funky testing and funky this, that, and the other to make the breakthrough cases sound not as bad as what you've been led to believe. To touch on another one of Alex's tweets, this time shifting away from breakthrough cases straight to just deaths and injuries and hospitalizations and all sorts of complications associated with the vaccine, this time from VAERS, V-A-E-R-S. These are the folks who track vaccines, and according to Google, they are a reliable source, but just happen to be a hotbed for conspiracy theorists who keep going on there and finding VAERS data to support their claim that people are dying from the vaccine, even though people are dying from the vaccine. But apparently you're not allowed to say that. According to VAERS, 3,410 people have suffered some sort of adverse side effect leading to their deaths after getting the vaccine. And on the grand scheme of things, 131,318 people have experienced bad side effects. Incredible. 131,000. The other stories we were talking about were all about the rare breakthrough cases, and they were more than happy to talk about how rare it is that you got like 9,000 people who got breakthrough cases after the fact. You wouldn't catch them dead writing an article about how there have been 131,000 negative side effects to the vaccine itself. You are not going to find that. You have to go to places like VAERS to find it. And even then, they're trying to discredit them in various ways by saying that the data can be misleading whenever you do find data like this. But it's horrifying. 8,000 of them ended up in hospital. 16,000 of them went to the emergency room. 19,000 of them just took a basic office visit, went to see someone. But 3,410 deaths. And you'd have to believe that it's more than that, because you've seen the stories about people who get a heart attack after getting this thing, and they say, well, purely coincidental, right? So you'd have to think it's more than that. But even if we take them straight at their word, and it's just 3,410, and 131,000 people have gotten an adverse side effect, that should be enough to scare the shit out of everybody. This is the sort of thing that you should be able to say without being branded a conspiracy loon or some kind of, kook, all these misinformation peddler, whatever you want to call it, because these are real people, and this is a real concern. If you don't want to get this thing because you see these sort of statistics, you should be able to say that without being banned or ridiculed or whatever, because these are real people. And these are the same people who tell you that every life matters and yada, 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 but they will happily bury this one under tons of rubble. They will bury stories like this. Okay? Colorado woman. They have had to report that she died after getting the J&J vaccine. And as I can tell here, it's not even displaying the whole thing. Move that to one side right there. After getting the J&J vaccine. Okay? How old was she? 35 years old. 35! Probably the lowest risk group, and she's a woman, so they say that men tend to die of COVID more than women. So here's somebody who's a woman, young, got this thing, and died. And it's from the Johnson & Johnson thing that they've all but pulled at this point. I'm not hearing too much about it. I assume it's been pulled, but who knows. And those are the ones that we know about because they happened immediately after getting the shot. These are the ones they can't deny. The ones they can deny, you go home, a couple of days later, you drop dead, or you go into hospital, or whatever. They can skirt their way around those ones. They can't skirt their way around the ones that get it and, it hits them right away. Like her. So, these are the kind of stories that, you're not allowed to talk about, speculate, to even mention. And this is some very scary stuff. And they keep just dismissing these types of stories. And there's so many of them at this point that you imagine that at some point they're just not going to be able to get away with this. When you've got guys like John Oliver coming out and doing their little late night bits about, all these crazy people, don't listen to Joe Rogan and don't listen to Tucker Carlson when they raise questions about the vaccine. You wonder if this was one of his viewers and she watched his skit about go get the vaccine and she went out and got it and died, is there any accountability for people like that? No. Is there any accountability for Facebook and YouTube and so forth for banning these sort of stories that are reported by genuine news people? Okay, this is Fox 17. This is a real news site, and they're out there telling you that, hey, somebody died of this thing. And there's so many stories like this right now. There's so many. And when you try to piece it all together, when you try to gather all these stories together, you find out that they're not so rare, despite all the bullshit you're reading on your local press. It's not rare. 130,000 adverse effects, that is not rare. Okay, that is a trend as far as I'm concerned. If you released however many million batteries and 130,000 of them exploded, that is not rare. That's a big deal. So these people, they get to have their cake and eat it. The House always wins. They always cook the books however they want to, and when you point it out, you get banned. But you know what? Whatever. It's becoming harder for them to hide this stuff, and if the CDC has started tracking it, then you know that in a couple of months we'll be looking at numbers in the thousands. And what do you tell someone like this? What do you tell a person like this who went out and got this thing that she probably didn't need to get and died? What do you tell them? What do you tell her family? There's nothing to say. It didn't have to happen. It really did not have to happen, but it did. And these are the ones who got it first. Lord knows what happens in a year, 2 years, 5 years. You got spiked proteins in your body. What's that going to do to you in a couple of years? Maybe nothing. Maybe absolutely nothing, and everything is perfectly fine. But what if it's something? Because this, what we're looking at right here, this is something. And here's the kind of propaganda you get.
I'm Dr. Bertley, president of COSI, but I'm also an immunologist. There's a lot of misinformation about what's inside the COVID-19 vaccine. Truth is, there's just a few simple ingredients. Water, sugar, salt, fat, and most importantly, a building block for protein that teaches your body how to recognize and fight COVID-19. That's less stuff than a candy bar or a can of pop. And the vaccine can save your life. And that's why I'll take the shot.
I mean, come on, dude. You gotta love it. I'll take the shot. You'll notice that they have completely removed the dislike counters, turned off their comments. Very smart, Ohio Department of Health. Very smart. And they got a black guy to do it. So that, appeal to minorities and shit. He's trying to imply that it's less harmful than a candy bar. There's less in there than a candy bar, so it's safe, right? I wonder if those 130,000 people, how many of them had a Snickers or something, and had to go to the ER because they had a Snickers. That's probably a good number of people, but you have to be factoring in peanut allergies and shit. But water, fat, and protein building blocks. That last ingredient, that last thing, boy, that last step's a doozy. But you gotta love these people. You gotta absolutely love these people. And they're gonna keep doing it for as long as they can. Wait for your vaccine passports. This is the carrot, folks. This is the carrot. These types of articles where they're saying, oh, it's rare, and this is the good side of things. This is them being very nice. When they tell you that this stuff is rare and they give you bullshit stats, very easy to disprove statistics. This is them actually being nice, because after a while they're going to stop being nice. They're going to stop trying to convince you to get the shot, because vaccine hesitancy, that's a real thing. There are a lot of people now who are just not going to get it, and the local news will tell you it's because of vax misinformation and yada yada yada. They have more supply than they have demand. They won't ship the overstock that they have to third world countries because apparently it's more important to keep it here rather than save lives across the globe or whatever the hell, You'll have Bill Gates, the soon-to-be divorced Bill Gates, coming out and telling everybody that they're not going to allow, third world countries to develop their own type of thing, or they're not going to share the ingredients with them so that they can manufacture it themselves because, patents and all that. And it's supposed to be all coming from a good place, right? That is still them being nice. That is still them being nice. When they decide to be bad, when they decide to put their foot down, say, you're not getting into the store, you're not getting into this hospital, you're not going to this game, you're not getting on this plane, or any number of things. You're not going to be allowed to leave your state, your city, your home until you get vaccinated. That is them when they start to put their foot down. But for right now, this is actually the bright side of things. Would you believe it?